Good morning. Good afternoon. My name is Phyllis Ellis. I am the president of the Brockton Area Branch National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. We would like to welcome all of you for this very important day because, as we know, elections are important, but most people do not know what midterm elections mean and what they're all about. So today we're going to tell you what midterm elections are and how important they are. We have a wonderful speaker today in Willie Wilson Jr. And on behalf of the membership committee, they did a great job putting this together, so I'd like to thank Vivette and Courtney, Doris, Danny for doing all of this. I'm going to have Vivette Davis come up. She's the membership chair. She's going to introduce Mr. Wilson, and then we'll get started. Vivette.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for your time and for coming out on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. I am the chair of the membership committee, and one of our charges of the membership committee is to increase voter registration in our communities. Brockton, unfortunately, has a very low voter registration for our residents, and even more so, the participation at the polls are very low, particularly during midterm elections. And so we found that this would be a perfect opportunity to educate residents on the importance of midterm elections, the role of congressmen and senators, and also likely discuss some of the ballot issues that will come up. This will be a two-part forum. We think it's important enough that we probably can't cover all the issues in one forum, and so we will have this forum and have one at a later date. We're fortunate enough to have Willie Wilson Jr. come out and speak on this very important issue. I do have a bio to introduce him. Yet the phone I have has just locked on me, and it's not my phone. So I need to have the person who owns his phone unlock it. I apologize. Thank you. Willie A. Wilson Jr. is the past curator of the Brockton Historical Society, a retired teacher of African American Studies, and head of the Social Science Department at Brockton High School. A lifelong resident of the city, his passions are the study of national and world events as they affect Brockton and other post-industrial cities. The sharing of those ideas with students, he has published the City of Brockton History Trail, a mapping guide that illuminates Brockton's downtown architectural and social history. I would like to introduce Willie A. Wilson Jr.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here. Vivette had asked me if I would come and actually talk about voter registration, and I'm by no means an expert. And so I'm glad that we have a nice, intimate group. First of all, I'd like to thank the Phyllis and the NAACP, Vivette and Courtney Henderson, Karima Lewis, Doris Smith, and of course Danny Steele. We had several meetings at Panera, and I've been excited about this, and it's just nice to be here. It's nice to be here in this space, this actual space. As some of you know, Brockton High School was established in 1864, and where we are now is one of the buildings, the site of one of the buildings of Brockton High before it became a library in 1912. So it's nice to just be here in this physical space, and so we're going to start right off. Right here? Yeah, I think I'll stand and sit and, okay. Right here? Okay. We're going to, maybe I will sit. I'm going to make a few remarks, and then really, I'm glad we have a small group. So the forum, I love the forum style because actually I learn a lot in the exchange as well. So as I said, I'm no specialist on voting trends, but I know that roughly 59% of eligible voters participated in the presidential election of 2016, compared to that of 63% in 2008. So voter turnout averages about 60% during presidential elections, as opposed to 40% during midterm elections. And turnout is lower for the odd year primary and local elections. As a history teacher at Brockton High School, in the past, we would have the registrar of voters for the city of Brockton. We would actually have, it was him at the time, come up to the high school, and we'd register 18-year-old students at the high school. And so my focus was always to get younger people to get engaged in the political process, and to try to teach them that that's part of their civic responsibility. And so that's kind of my foray or interest. Now, this is the reason why I was excited about doing this, and I just think the committee did an excellent job. And so what I want to do is, if you haven't had the opportunity of picking up some of the literature at the table, please do so. First of all, there's the NAACP Civil Rights Federal Legislative Report Card, which is really wonderfully done, and it focuses on Massachusetts. And then we have the Brockton area branch of the NAACP, and its history and involvement. And then we have the 218 midterm issues. And this is really a nice job that Courtney had put together. There are, according to the Gallup polls, there are 12 issues concerning the midterms. But what Courtney did, and I think she did it so well, was she just highlighted some of the things. Tip O'Neill, the late Tip O'Neill, said all politics is local. And so what she did, she just took out, she focused on taxes, economy, the opioid crisis, Social Security, and health care. And on the back of that is the date of our second forum, which is September 29th. And then we have the Join the Fight during the membership campaign for the NAACP. So it's kind of an ad, but it's a fantastic organization since 1909 that has brought to the forefront issues of discrimination. And then we have this is the actual mail-in voter registration for those to mail in. And we have a nice handout that we downloaded from Secretary Francis Galvin's office. He's the Secretary of the Commonwealth, registering to vote online, by mail, or in person. And then a nice handout that I know Karima was able to put together on U.S. elections with the focus on Massachusetts. So all that literature it's very good. It's very helpful, and I do want to call your attention if you didn't get any of those, you want to get those before we finish. Now, the midterm elections are held halfway through every presidential term. Some refer to them as the congressional elections. There are several reasons why the midterm elections of 2018 are so critical. I'll name two. The turnover is a real one. As one journalist wrote, this year, a genuinely massive amount of government is up for election. The entire House, 1/3 of the Senate, 34 governorships, and most state legislatures. The second is the effects of this year's elections will last over a decade. And the reason is because of gerrymandering. This year, gerrymandering and the judiciary are both on the line. On the local level, the winners of this election will draw the political districts that will impact representation well beyond 2013. On the national level, control of Congress could determine the laws and the judges who interpret those laws for maybe even longer. So it doesn't matter if you're talking about entertainment or sports or politics. People won't get respect or true change until they've attained a degree of representation, be it in the hearts and minds of the legislatures of the land. So it's important. We're at a critical point. And unfortunately, during the last presidential election, I know some people said to me, I am so disgusted, Willie, I'm not even going to vote. I'm so fed up. And so by their not voting, they in fact did. And I think regardless of how you feel, what party you're affiliated with, the results are because not enough people vote. Even my high school students, I would tell them, I said, it's important to vote, regardless of whether other students like who you vote for, just get in the process. And I think it's really to the point where our institutions are under attack. And I have to say, I'm honored and privileged because Representative Jerry Cassidy is here today. But even over my years, I have never, ever, every time I've contacted, and going back to high school, Representative Creedon, anytime I've contacted a representative from Brockton, I have always, and my friends have always had a response. And so I think we've been blessed in terms of who we've had in the past. But unless we stay engaged in the process, forces will try to change. And so what we're doing today is we're talking about how important midterms are. And I am ashamed to say there have been times I haven't voted in some of the midterms. And I live in Ward 1, a few houses down from my voting station, which is the Hancock School. And in preparing for this, I felt guilty because I can see I'm just one individual, but nationwide, if you multiply that, and this is how forces who have a different agenda that's not for the betterment of the average person are gaining ground. So that's the premise, and that's why I'm here today. And I love the fact that we have a small enough group to engage in terms of questions. And by no means is this the end all. But I know Madeleine Albright just recently wrote a book, and I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But having taught U.S. history and sociology and history courses at Stonehill and Bridgewater, as I prepared for this, one of the things that came to my mind was the late Reverend Martin Niemöller. Am I pronouncing it right, Mr. Ryan? Mr. Weiner? Reverend Martin Niemöller. I can't. He was arrested by the German Gestapo in 1938.
Oh, yeah,
Niemöller. He said and this is what he wrote, and it's something we've always used. And he wrote, in Germany, the Nazis first came for the communists. I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the Catholics, but I didn't speak up because I was a Protestant. Then they came for me, and by that time, there was no one left to speak for me. And I feel that this is such a horrible time in our history, but it's also a time pregnant with great hope. And so, but I think we really average people have to get involved. We have to encourage our children to get involved. All 5 of my children, my youngest twin daughters are here today. They knew from an early age, you've got to get involved, you've got to vote. And now I really feel like the President Obama had recently said that the institutions, this will test us as a nation if we can rise up and if our institutions work. But I really feel we're besieged. The average person the average working person is besieged and endangered. And life as we know it in America and what democracy means is under critical attack.
So with that said, I'd like to open it up to questions, and we can start local, and there's nothing that's not within the purview of this forum. Yes.
Mr. Wilson, could you explain a little more in detail gerrymandering?
Mm-hmm.
I think that you said that would have an impact on the midterm elections, and, you know, even as a historian myself, don't quite understand,
Mm-hmm.
the whole issue of gerrymandering.
Right.
And also, I would just like, if you can, to take one or two issues on the Gallup poll list of issues
Mm-hmm.
and explain how they pertain to the community of Brockton.
All right. Well,
Just
first,
issues like-
okay, good. We'll start with gerrymandering. Eldridge Jerry was a Massachusetts rep. That the term actually started here in Massachusetts, and he was, I can't think of the year, but it was 1800s, I believe, and so districts were redrawn. And so what you have is, it's a situation where the districts are rejoined, and I want to give you the accurate information. Let me just pull that out. But it started here in Massachusetts, and so what different parties would do, they would draw districts that actually were favorable to them. And over the years, they have some of those plans have come under attack and scrutiny by the state and federal government, because in the South, they would create white districts and black districts and so forth and so on. So, and then finally this year, I know it's gone to the Supreme Court, and the court has ruled on some. So it's a way of those people who are current legislators, it's a way of drawing districts that are beneficial to them. But I actually do have a nice breakdown. There was a journalist who did a nice, and I know I have it here someplace. He did a nice job showing by chart form, if I can put my hand on it, what it looks like. Okay, and this is the question that you brought up was, what is gerrymandering? And I can't seem to put my hand on it. Yeah, but I know I do have it with me. And what he did was he showed charts in terms of what one district would look like and how you manipulate. So it's been under great scrutiny. Now, by the same token, in reference to gerrymandering, they have actually, some states have passed laws where, it's kind of restricted the rights of those people for eligibility to vote. So it comes under the same guise. It's preventing people from exercising their right to vote.
Can I piggyback off that question?
Yes.
How do the accomplish, do they have a forum to say, okay, we're going to change the districts, we're going to change this, or do they put out mailings to the people who live in that district saying, do you mind if we change it? How is it? How do they?
Oh, that's a very good question, because, and I'm so glad we have Representative Cassidy here. But let me for example, we have Representative Lynch, and this is a congressional district, and over the years they're drawn and changed. So sometime part of Brockton is with Quincy and Holbrook, and I don't know. Could you answer that question?
Sure, about the Congress?
Yeah, how the districts in general are.
Yeah, next year we'll be doing the census, the state census will be going around, then the national census.
Right.
And we know in Brockton, it's 90,000 people. But we know it's over 100,000.
Right.
If we get over 100,000, we're gonna get an awful lot more federal funding back into the city, which, go back to the schools and stuff like that. So that's a key point, as you know, Tony Bishop, that the federal funding, over 100,000 gets so much more money. It's gonna help an awful lot. So when we do the census next year, that's very crucial for all of us, to make sure everybody fills out that form.
Now, this is the problem, one year I did serve on the census committee.
Right.
Some people, they're in buildings where the basement level isn't officially an apartment, and so some are reticent to get involved, and that's one of the reasons why we have been unable to hit the 100,000 threshold, even though we know we're there, you know. But the other, I don't know about the other, how they decide, you know, in terms of, and again, it's gerrymandering, it's whoever's in power. I can say one thing, the public is, to my knowledge, the public has never been part of the process. It's a political decision. And so you wouldn't get a postcard or something that you might hear, they're considering redistricting, you know. And the only way that a good example is, for example, your school district. So, you know, in the old days, your neighborhood, it was your neighborhood school. And then when they found that, well, you know, wait a minute, it's unfair to say just because your child lives in a certain zip code that he or she should have privileges or access to materials that somebody else in a different zip code, you know, lives. So, you know, so that we talk about fairness and things like that.
But a few years ago, as we know, we had 2 congressmen here in the city of Brockton, which I didn't think was right. You know, having one congressman, you get a lot more bang for your buck. With the one congressman, Lynch, we had a split, so thank goodness we got back to
one.
Congressman Lynch, and he's very thoughtful. Right.
So it's the Board of Elections that draws the voting?
It's one select, it's one group of legislators, and they usually have representatives of both parties, I think, and so that's how it's done.
It also starts with the city. The city will do their census
Right.
next year.
Right.
And then it goes
And it is based on the census. That's why this is the midterm elections of 2018, and this election, these men and women that are elected into office are actually going to be the ones that carry out the 2020 census. And so that's why this particular one is more critical than ones in the past, because that's going to impact us until 2030 and beyond.
Yeah, I think it's important to make clear how this process goes. In the Constitution, it says that every 10 years there has to be a nationwide census. And so currently there's 435 people in the House of Representatives. And that number has been set since 1929. So it's a set number. It doesn't matter how many people are in the United States.
Right.
It's still going to be like that. So every 10 years, it's called reapportionment. So it's like portions, and they spread them out. There's recounting, depending on what happened to the population in your state.
Right.
So when I moved to Massachusetts in 1973, Massachusetts had 12 members in the House of Representatives. Now we have 9. All right. So in 80 we lost 1. In 90 we lost 1. In 2000 we stayed the same. But as a result of the 2010 census, we lost another one, so we're down at 9. So within 2 years, by the next 2, so this time will be 2022, well, first you're told, your state is told, are you going to keep your number, or are you going to have a diminished number, or are you going to have an increased number? So states like Arizona,
Florida,
Texas, and Florida that have influxes of people they'll gain a few members of the House of Representatives. Ohio, for example, and some of those Midwestern states who are deindustrializing are losing. So then what happens is, after the numbers tell you how many reps you can have, then your state legislature, this is what you're talking about, has 2 years to make new districts. So they reapportion, they create these districts. Even on this little piece of paper here that was given out, you can see Massachusetts, what the shapes of the districts are.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so the members of the.
That's this one.
Right, of each state House of Representatives. Now, as a result of this, the party that's in power, so say it's North Carolina, where the Republicans have a lot of power, they will change congressional districts, and you can just like slap together this town and this town and this town in order to make districts where Republicans will get elected. And you know, you can do all kinds of chicanery. There are some.
But now the Supreme Court has ruled that they've now ruled that there's certain things you can't do. In the past, the political parties could do whatever they want.
I have to say, those are very modest. It's really modest what they say that you can't do. Most of it are about racial things. So like in Georgia, when this first happened, they were taking areas of Georgia that had heavy black populations and just clumping all those little towns together, Atlanta and a couple of other places, and other areas, so that it looked like you were sure you were going to get a black representative from that district, but you wouldn't have black people voting in other districts where they might vote Democrat rather than for Republican. So you can create these kind of things. So it is true, Representative Cassidy, if he's reelected actually in 2020, will participate, because in Massachusetts, the state legislature forms a committee that does this. You remember when like Tom Finnegan got in trouble because he was doing stuff. So they will do that. Some states, like California, for example, recently, and there's a couple other states, have created nonpartisan commissions to take it out of the hands of elected representatives who might want to get somebody from their own party in that might be in their own thing. So you do have that. Creating these odd-looking districts to have a predetermined event, and that's why the gerrymandering came up. It's like 1803, and Eldridge Gerry wanted to have a friend of his elected to the House of Representatives. So he got the state legislature then to create a district.
It looked like a snake.
No, like a salamander.
A salamander, yeah.
So that's why where they got
Yeah,
gerrymandered.
yeah. This is a so nice to have a government teacher in the forum. Yep.
Guys, if you have a question to ask, you have to go up to the mic.
Oh, I'm
because
sorry.
Steve's mic is recording it. If you have questions, go up to the mic.
Oh, this is good.
Information on.
All right, I want to thank you so much. Wait a minute, I want to come back to Karima. Did we? Because there was a second part. Okay.
Continue,
All right.
but I just want you to talk about some of the issues as they relate to Brockton.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Go ahead. We see so we can come back.
So, as you are a retired teacher and you are a teacher, do you guys teach these things to the students? So that, like you said, you have them when they're 18 or whatever, you have a little food for them to come and vote, but do they know about the issues and about how elections are and things are decided? Is this taught in the curriculum in school these days?
Well, it depends on what you're teaching. I teach at
Steve, you have to go to the mic.
To the mic.
no, just to answer your question. I'm sorry. This is a question in the state about the lack of civic education. But many high schools, I'm not sure about Brockton High, but have government classes. There's AP US Government, which I've taught and I think I am going to teach next year. And, I teach at a night program at Stoughton High, and I teach US Government there. So everyone in my night school class are adults, or at least young adults, and all of them are, well, if they're citizens, are eligible to vote. So I'm doing, I guess what I call citizenship education, explaining all this stuff. So all this thing about the gerrymandering, I did that recently, and I have a map that shows the salamander and all this sort of thing. So I think it's taught, pretty widely in high schools, right?
Yeah, it's taught. It's part of the frameworks, the MCAS. It's taught, but unfortunately, in the past we used to be able to spend more time. So now, because of the frameworks, we give it shorter thrift than what we did in the past. Yep. Good questions. Good. This is what I mean about I love the interactive, yep. Yep, good.
Hello, everyone. I want to first thank Brother Willie for being here today. So my question is kind of piggyback off what someone mentioned about local stuff that's been going on.
Mhm.
So as you all know, I'm I think one of three. There's myself, there's Moses, and there's Gene that are people of color that elected Brockton regionally.
Mm-hmm.
Brockton is a minority city.
Mm-hmm.
The school committee is completely majority, or completely white. What can we do in terms of voter apathy? What can we do in terms of people actually getting out and there's true representation that reflects the city? I think that's a lot of our frustration. I don't want to put that all on you, Willie,
Mm-hmm.
but I have to ask that
Yep.
question. Thank you.
All right. Well, again, there's voter apathy, and how do you change the landscape so that people feel that they have a vested interest? I think there are some citizens that are still. I know I was at a forum here for immigration not too long ago, and there's some citizens and people who are not citizens but residents of Brockton who feel uncomfortable, threatened. One woman came to me and she said that she was a certified nurse assistant, and she was from Jamaica, and she said, Mr. Wilson, she said, I work at a hospital, and she said, there are so many pressures on me, and I notice when I walk into a room, the patient, the minute they hear my accent, they view me differently than someone else who is white or who doesn't have an accent. And she says, these are the things that some of us deal with. And so it's a good question. I don't know where one begins to address it, except that you do get involved with your city councilors and those who, it's issue oriented. So in other words, I don't think anyone would vote for somebody just because he or she was a woman or he or she was black or Cape Verdean or Haitian. It still comes back to the issues in terms of how are you going to make the city better. And one of the things that I've noticed is this whole thing with residency. There are a lot of Brocktonians who over the years they've moved to West Bridgewater or East Bridgewater or a neighboring community, and all of a sudden many of them feel when they come back into the city they feel ostracized. People say, well, you're not a Brocktonian, and they grew up in the city and they have just as much love and respect. So it is a greater Brockton issue. It's not just Brockton, but it's Brockton, which is the only city in Plymouth County, and the surrounding towns. Good question. Maybe we can come up. We'll come back to that. Good question. It's on the books. It's on the record.
I have more of a comment, but I'd like to hear your reaction. One of the most powerful local officials is the district attorney, and this is a position that typically in Massachusetts goes uncontested. We have like 11 races across the Commonwealth, and typically these guys get in again and again without any competition. The ACLU of Massachusetts has a big project this year called What a Difference a DA Makes, and for the first time we've got 6 contested elections out of 11, including in Plymouth County. And this allows us to have a conversation about what that role should be. I mean, these people don't have really any supervision, any bosses, anybody to be accountable to except you, the voters. And now we're having a conversation this year in Plymouth County as to what should that office be doing? I'm somebody who has volunteered with the Massachusetts Bail Fund, and I know in the Plymouth House of Correction, there are a number of people there who just don't have a couple $100 bail. So we've created a system of debtors' prisons here in Massachusetts, unfortunately. There's a very small percentage that are actually convicted. And if you have $300 in your bank account, you're not going to be in that position. Sometimes people are being held pre-trial for offenses that even if they were found guilty, there's no jail sentence, attached to it. So now we're beginning to have a conversation about this and maybe thinking that the district attorney's office should be focusing on serious crime and prevention of serious crime rather than, locking people up for the lack of a few $100s. So again, it is typical that people are thinking about, both reps and senators in Congress and locally and governor's races, but we don't talk about district attorneys' races that much.
Oh, that's a good point. Very good. I mean, that's, I'm in my mind, I'm thinking, and I know of cases where some district attorneys have gotten into trouble simply because there seems to be lax supervision. That's an excellent question. I mean, very good. I don't have any response. I have to think about it.
Yeah, well, that's something we all need to think about.
But you said something that there's one organization that came to my attention recently and called No Labels. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's and they're doing it's at the national level, but introducing the Speaker Project. And I just want to read this. It says, in the past quarter century, the rules of the House of Representatives have been manipulated and distorted, so almost all power resides in the office of the House Speaker. And I'm just thinking of it as adapted to district attorney. Once powerful congressional committees have been neutered, while rank and file members are just along for the ride, empowered to do little more than rubber stamp or resist whatever comes out of the Speaker's office. This isn't how the founders intended it, and it must change now. The Speaker Project by No Labels is a campaign to mobilize citizens to condition their vote in this year's midterms on a House candidate's willingness to vote for the right kind of Speaker nominee in the next Congress. A Speaker who won't kowtow to the bullies and extremists in their own part, allows the minority party to be heard, supports rule changes that give bipartisan ideas a fighting chance. If you've had it with Washington and you're looking for a solution that can really fix the system, you come to the right place. Working in the middle is tough, but it's the place problems get solved. And then they go on and they talk about but you see, because what's happening now is there's a whole movement afoot to change some of the laws that govern exactly what you said in terms of corrections and penalties and that kind of thing. And so, that's the exciting part. The thing is how to organize so people can actually sit down and bring about the changes we want without. That's why I like this no label, so it's regardless of whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or Independent.
I just want to make one more comment. The Racial Justice Director of the ACLU of Massachusetts, his name is Rasan Hall, and he moved to Brockton a year and a half ago, and I think he would be an excellent speaker. They're not allowed at the ACLU to support particular candidates, but they talk about the issues around the DA race, and he's right here in Brockton. He's would be a wonderful person to have here.
Thank you.
I have a question. My question. Well, there are over 50,000 registered voters in Brockton, Massachusetts. Why is the voter turnout so low, and what can we do to get the people to the polls?
That's the same.
Vote.
Yeah.
They do not vote.
I don't. It's a good question. I mean, I do not have the answers. Some people will say it doesn't matter, and what I say is it does matter. And the sad thing is, some of the younger people have seen the model behavior of their parents, aunts, and uncles, and that's been a major turnoff. So, like some of the youth vote and some of these other social media groups have said they've had to fight that because the kids said, why should I do it? My mom doesn't think, and my dad says it's not worth it. They're going to do what they're going to do. So, I mean, how do you fight that pervasiveness? That's a good question. I'd have to think about it.
Get these people to the polls.
Yeah. Good questions.
So,
Remember, I'm the facilitator.
So Willie, you just mentioned about how there's this whole movement about, just kind of changing laws. Why is it that the president gets to write all these executive orders? Is that a way around kind of fidgeting with or changing the laws, or is that something totally different?
Well, the proclamations and executive orders, they're just that, from the executive branch. So they're not laws. I mean, President Obama did the same thing. So what happens is they have an effect for a certain amount of time, but they're not lasting.
Okay. But it seems like the executive orders that the president has been putting through are to turn upside down things that President Obama put in place.
Right.
And is that?
Well, see, because again, if that's the tragedy. Your party, the president, is in office, and if there's not a bipartisan relationship so that the law, the issue can become actually a law, then it's just a proclamation or executive order. So the next change in administration, the president can do that. But this has been, President Trump has done this at a level that has never been seen before in American history. But it isn't. It's still limited. But the damage is great. So what happens is it sets a tone, and there's such a deterioration. It sets a tone that it's then difficult to actually do the kind of work that a lot of politicians feel needs to be done.
I just have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
I know what it is. So getting people to the polls to vote has historically been a problem, and it's a problem everywhere. And so I was just wondering, well, I was thinking back to when I used to live in Boston. There were radio shows in which people would have a segment of time to talk about political issues. One, we all know WILD. And they did that either in the morning or the afternoon or whatever it was, because people listened to those stations and they make connections, really expansive connections that people individually just cannot do. There's also radio stations that are located in colleges. Emerson has one. I'm not sure about Bridgewater, and what's in this community and what's available to us right now. But why not think about some of those kinds of entrees into the community where people actually do listen? I was thinking first of the cable station, Brockton cable station, but people probably just flip through that. Just because there's so much talking, and it's just hard. I get that, it's hard. But some of these other stations where people sort of listen and they go there, and in their mind is in a different kind of place, and they're expecting to hear music, but then if there's a segment where there's some political sort of discussions, that might work a little bit better. I don't know about that. I don't know how to make that happen, but it's just something that I've been thinking about.
Well, I like the idea, and it's true. Bridgewater, Stonehill, they all have their radio stations. But I think it's in this day of social media, I think people already have the things that they like in terms of the apps, in terms of, and so unfortunately it's so, and it really is affiliated with their party or their the party they're interested in, or some kind of leaning, whether it's left or right. So I don't know how that would work, but I think it's a good idea. I mean, it's like, I think everything should be tried to get people, so, but that's thinking outside the box. It's good. Mm-hmm. As people are coming to the podium, I'm looking at Brother Bernard. I expect you to get up and. It's his birthday. Yep, birthday man in America.
I know you just mentioned about radio stations, but if we want to get younger people out, you're going to have to to Snapchat it, tweet, you're gonna have to do something like that
Yep.
in order to get them
Do it all.
interested and
Do
involved.
it all.
Yep.
Because otherwise they're not. So the other thing I want to say is about, you said there were 12 issues and she only put a few here.
Mhm.
And you said that they will affect us for the next 10 years. One thing about Social Security, as I look around the room, there are different ages here. So Social Security will impact all of us. And as a matter of fact, sometimes it doesn't even impact you directly, but indirectly. So my grandmother, I took her to her dental appointment the other day, where my grandmother only has 5 natural teeth. So her insurance was allowing her to only pay $12. So as of January 1st, because like you said, this says Trump, all the things that he's putting in place, now it's going up to $30. So $30 for her to get 5 teeth cleaned. So, I mean, that will affect us too, because at one time, you know, hopefully, God willing, we will all reach 65, 70, 75, whatever. So the thing is, how do we, the people who are in this room, because I mean, since we're here to talk about these things, make sure that we impact these issues that are here.
I hear you. I mean, I'm one of those people. I'm 66, so I'm just processing everything you said. But one of the what's happened is, and this is the tragedy about Obamacare. You know, I mean, in terms of President Trump gutting it, because even Republicans had said, "I want to support this bill." But they said they couldn't even party. The party would not allow them, even though they agreed with President Obama at the time. But now, so what Trump has done is just the opposite, and it's gutting, and that's why health care and Social Security, I mean, these weren't prioritized. They're all important, but these are the 5 because of the expense, and so. You know, as you were saying, this is one of the critical issues. Now, fortunately, you know, I mean, I've already seen bumper stickers, you know, don't blame me, I live in Massachusetts, but it's still a cost issue. So even though, and I like Governor Baker, but the tragedy is, even though he's considered the most popular governor in the nation, but his silence on the horrors and the behavior of the president, I think, is going to hurt him being a governor in a blue state. And so you are absolutely right, you know, and you can see there were so many Republicans, thousands of them, that said had it not been for Obamacare, some of their relatives wouldn't be alive today. And yet they sit silent as health care is gutted. And with no alternative brought to the table that's feasible for the average person. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I have a concern. I have stage 5 kidney disease, and I am on a list for a kidney transplant, and I'm worried about the insurance paying for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I have to say.
And see, and your actually your situation, when you multiply that across the 50 states and 16 U.S. territories and so forth, you can see where, you know, the issue, it's a healthcare issue, but it becomes political, you know. Oh, the birthday man is rising. There's no red carpet, but you're getting an escort.
It's good to see you, my brother.
Should we say happy birthday?
Happy birthday to you. Day, dear Steve. Oh, it must be good being 50.
Over and over again. At a recent meeting, our meetings are held, general meetings are held on the 4th Monday of each month. At a recent meeting, we had President Clark of Bridgewater State College there to address us. and ask us in what way Bridgewater State College could be helpful to the Brockton community, the Brockton and NAACP community. And one of the suggestions was that Bridgewater sponsor a speakers forum. And President Clark suggested that he could do that once a quarter. So I think it would be a great idea if we or you were to think of persons with national prominence who could impact the voting population here in Brockton to be more active, to come speak. And my question to Willie is, on a national basis, who would you encourage the community to invite? In other words, what prominent politicians or people in the black or minority community on a national basis would be very effective in impacting our community?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, Jesse Jackson was very popular in this regard. Could you give us possibly some names of people that you are watching or following?
Mm-hmm.
Tavis Smiley, or someone like that. Maybe you should give us some other names. Maybe you might have some names that you want to submit to us to suggest to President Clark.
When you spoke, immediately Cory Booker came to mind. You know,
So that's
who's that? Oh yes, that's right. Yeah, yeah, you're moving to New Jersey. Yeah, that's an excellent idea because I know when President Obama addressed the group at the Democratic National Party in Boston, when he was just a representative, senator from Illinois, and a friend of mine who's a police officer, he had said, you know, he had told his fellow officers in Boston, he said, this guy really could be president. And sure enough, you know, and you know, this is the thing, you know, that's a good idea, you know, to come up with some names.
Yeah. With permission of our president, Phyllis Ellis, I would suggest that you submit to us names that you think would be appropriate, and we could submit them, talk about it at an executive committee meeting and suggest it to President Clark that in the upcoming months we would like to be a vote by our executive committee.
And the reason why that's so appropriate is because Brockton is not alone. There are other communities where the apathy is just as great or even worse. And so, you know, that's a good idea. Good. Yep. There's no question that's too foolish or unimportant.
So in looking at the, this midterm elections issues, I know you said that this is just some. I don't know what the others are, but I'm hoping that education is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just feel like with the current Secretary of Education, who doesn't favor public education, what does this mean for our kids in our communities?
Mm-hmm.
Because our kids are failing miserably. I mean, I know we have the good stories about how some kids are doing well, you know, they're going to Harvard, MIT, or whatever, but the bulk of our kids are struggling. So you know, you haven't heard much from her lately, but when you do hear from her, it's kind of sad, the things that come out of her mouth. So what do you think about the state of our education?
Well, that in fact, I had, there was a list of the 12. I was wondering, Bivette, did you have that? Okay, so what happened is, I believe education is one of them. That's Secretary DeVos, and she, again, no experience in education. You know, she was appointed by President Trump, and everywhere she goes, it's controversial because, again, students from elementary to college feel that she's not addressing the issue. In fact, she was on the hot seat, I don't know if any of you saw, a week ago, because she has a safety committee and she refused to address gun violence. And I know they were raking her over on that. But here, the other thing too is it starts local. Now look at we have a $1 million, $6 million deficit here in the Brockton School Department, and so it again, it comes back to, you know, what can we do? And we had the Education Reform Act, which was really good, but that formula was flawed even then, and it takes, you know, I felt we should have been more aggressive. And the poorer communities, there are 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts, and it's always the poorer communities like Worcester and Fall River and Brockton that suffer. And so when I talked earlier about it shouldn't matter where your zip code is, but for students in Wellesley and Weston, they don't have that problem, you know, and because there's adequate funding. And so again, I know Jerry Cassidy and our legislative team at the State House at Beacon Hill are working on it. But you are right, education is really critical, and it's not just a question of you know, getting their apps out and everything. It's old time reading, you know, reading the basics. Mm-hmm.
So mine won't be a question. I just a thank you. Again, thank you to Willie. But we also want to thank, we have a BCA here today that is taping this program. So can we give them a hand clap, please? And you know, as Mark always does, Mark Lindy, their general manager, he always reminds us that BCA has a tremendous amount of community programming, which includes the NAACP forum. So we discuss these sort of issues on the forum. We have a lot of guests that are coming on. We're going to have Claire come on next week. We're going to have Darren Duarte, the new Director of Community Relations for the Brockton Police Department. So there's a lot going on. And on tomorrow, just to give you a heads up, some of you may not know tomorrow's my birthday, but thank you. But the other thing is that no. So I'm a talk show host on WVDF 1530 AM, and our show airs 4 to 5 p.m. on Sundays, and it's call in. We talk about all political persuasions and activities here in the city of Brockton, so I wanted to thank you for that.
What time?
4 to 5 p.m. 15:30 a.m. Now, wait a minute. Some of y'all looking at me is like, what is a.m.? Yes, that's... so y'all remember the WILD days? There you go. And also, I stream live on my Facebook page, Bishop Tony Branch. Thank you all. No.
So this is for the whole room, not just the facilitator. So I just want to talk through, because sometimes, like when we go to the polls and we have these and you're like, make a decision, is this right for the economy? Is this right for my family? Whatever. So the first one about taxes. I want to get everybody's opinion. You know, do you think it's a good idea, not a good idea? Because it's saying that the state will lose this much money for one weekend of not having taxes. But on the other hand, more people will go shopping because they think they're getting a break. So I just want to know what everybody's, or who would like to make a comment on that, what their thought process is, so I can have a thought process, something different from my own head.
The August
tax holiday?
Yes.
spring
Yes.
weekend.
Does anybody have an opinion?
So does anybody have a, so can we poll people? Do you all support? So let me give you my story. So my story was, and Jerry, you're here, you should come up and help us, because Jerry wasn't in the legislature at that time, but he was in a different role. So for me, a lot of people go out and buy TVs. I'm telling you, our community, well, maybe, now I'm not trying to stereotype, but we do. We go out and get our 40 and 50-inch TVs because the taxes are not there.
Or laptops.
Or the laptops or anything else. But it doesn't cover, Jerry, it doesn't cover, somebody asked me this last week, it doesn't cover car sales, correct?
Right.
$100 or less.
So
it's
it's,
$2,500.
yes, $2,500 or less.
So,
Like for refrigerators.
So so do you all support the sales tax break for the weekend?
No.
so the people
Did
who
you say
don't,
no?
I just want to know why.
Willie said no?
I didn't say no, he said no.
Come up here, Brian, come on up here, because the majority said yes.
So that's why I want to get my own head.
You said no, why?
No.
Okay.
I mean,
All right, this is good.
I've never really supported it because it doesn't really benefit me. I mean, I'm only going to do something and spend money on something that's going to benefit me. Why should I go out and buy a 40-inch TV you know, and spend more money if it's really not gonna benefit me.
So that's
You know,
the $60 deal, that's
No,
not,
$60 is not enough.
right.
You know, give me half price, maybe then, you know what I mean? But, the tax holiday
But you're
never
talking
really
about
made
your
any sense.
individual self, like he said, in our community, the majority of
Yes, I see a lot of people go out and doing that,
spend the money
but-
on that day, that weekend.
But you think of it, if you would, you know, there's still like, layaway, I mean, you could do that, and then you get more of a comprehension of your money, saving it down the line, than making one big lump sum out of your checking account.
20% off
So
or so.
20% is not really gonna save you, because you're gonna spend the money anyway. Getting there, gas is like $3 almost right now, so getting to wherever you're going, to spend that money is gonna even cost you more.
Once
So
again,
it's not
you're
a comprehensive.
individualizing.
Say again?
You're individualizing.
No, I'm not.
But that's
I
what you
mean,
asked for.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, but you know, it never really made any sense to me, so I just don't do it.
Jerry, can you help us with this?
So Jerry, does it hurt the Commonwealth?
Well, see, that's my.
That's
Yeah.
what
What it is, you know, we had it 4 years in a row, the tax holiday, and worked out well during the economy that we're in back then. But now we're like, 8% above benchmark, which we have $2.4 billion extra this legislative budget, which is great. But, you know, it's going back and forth between the House and Senate as whether we should have a tax holiday or not. And I know there's probably 80% of the people here want a tax holiday. So, just to get back to your point, you know, Willie, thank you very much for being great.
Oh, it's nice being here.
And I'd like to see the young people, you know, there's probably a half dozen young people out here and getting back to voting. That's what we do, is we don't use the phone anymore, you know, the Juniper 64135
Right.
that we used to have.
Oh, my goodness.
But no, it's great. That's what kids do, is they text each other and send out notices that way. And getting back to the gerrymandering, there's 28 minority-majority districts in Massachusetts. And my district, the 9th Plymouth, is one of those. And I'm going to make sure that it stays minority-majority. And I just want to say that.
Jerry,
Steve?
about that, the tax holiday, I'm asking him a
Yeah,
question.
tax.
The tax holiday is also attached to the reduction of the sales tax.
Correct, yeah.
Okay, and that's from 6.25 to
To
5,
five.
which is a huge
Right.
diminishment of
Right.
taxes coming into the state. And so it's always tempting to take sort of the momentary gift
Sure.
and not look down the road what it's costing you.
Right.
If these two tax initiatives pass, the state of Massachusetts, which might have a large surplus at the moment, right, is facing all these problems. And I mean, it's true, like the revenues came in higher than projected
Right.
for this time.
Yeah.
But, you know, if this is only a bubble and that thing comes out, there's all this money. So like, for example, if Brockton wants more money out of education funding, right?
Right.
That's gotta come out of taxes,
Right.
right? I mean, so it's the immediate thing, and also they find out with the, you know, the tax holiday, people who are gonna buy a product, just wait till then. And if you go to the stores, I mean, I was at the last time we had it, I was looking for a TV, and I went and sort of surveyed the stores like 2 weeks in advance. The prices went up for
Right.
the tax holiday at Best Buy.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they were down like the week after. So I'm just saying, it's not that great a benefit, and there's a big
Right.
loss that isn't immediate.
Right, yeah, I mean, and like you're saying about the tax holiday, you can go out and buy a refrigerator or a TV or something like that, and that would actually lose money for the state in that aspect, but it would help the consumer, which is great. But getting back to the 5%, that's just like, it's an easy vote. I mean, oh yeah, I'm gonna hit the 5%. It's just like the marijuana issue that, you know, the city of Brockton voted for the marijuana. And I really don't see that was a good vote here in the,
Yeah, but,
for the whole state.
oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's a local issue.
Right.
And when and it was so close, it was 51 to
Right.
48.
It was very close.
Very close, and so many citizens, even young people, said, you know, it's so close, that it would really, it would behoove the city fathers to actually do it again, city fathers and mothers, by the way, to actually have another vote, because they, we're at a point where we want to do positive things, and that's a real controversial
And
issue.
all the surrounding towns have voted that down.
Right.
So Brockton would be known as the marijuana capital of this region.
I have a question. So for you, why is that? Why is voting yes for marijuana? Why is that such a hindrance?
We've been fighting drugs for years and years and years to come, and I just believe that it's wrong for us to just rely on the drugs to fund our schools and stuff like that. The medical marijuana, the place up on West Chestnut Street, that's
In good health.
That's in good health. That's a very good, well-run facility. I've gone in there a few times, and people who need it. There was a kid who went in, was in a wheelchair, and he was having spasms. And the officer that was there on duty doing the job there, he said, if this the marijuana is not should be confined to just this medical marijuana. It helped that kid when he was leaving. And the spasms are gone quite a bit. I just don't see a lot of marijuana use down here in Brockton.
Right.
It's just I campaigned against it, but the citizens voted for it. Did you vote for it, Steve?
Say something on the marijuana business.
So we
may
do you want to come up?
Have dispensaries, right? Here, legal dispensaries, but marijuana is legal. Now, I live near where you live,
Right.
and you may not know what marijuana smells like, but it is everywhere. I mean, it is just everywhere, up and down the street, in cars and stuff like this. So the point is here, by not having a dispensary here in Brockton, where we could get tax revenue,
Right.
and I seldom agree with the mayor on anything, but by not having that doesn't eliminate marijuana. So if you think that this is a gateway drug or anything like that, that doesn't change it. The fact that we don't have dispensaries, we just are not having a benefit.
No. So we got on the marijuana thing.
Oh, I'm
Did
good.
anybody wanted to further? So in order for it to get on the ballot here in the city of Brockton, it needs to be a referendum. Were folks suggesting that it be a referendum? Oh, everybody's quiet. Are there a referendum on whether or not we want to have the dispensaries in the city of Brockton? Are there any weed smokers in here that want to go on the record? Why y'all quiet in front of the bishop now? We're not in church. Does anybody want to go? Any of the young people want to talk about it? 'Cause let me tell you what I know for a fact. I'm going to say, I can smell it. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And for those of you, see, when we were kids, I ain't gonna give away my age, it was called reefer. I don't know what they're smoking nowadays, but they call it wet weed because it smells so bad. It smells bad. It's called wet weed. But with that said, so does anybody want to go on the record that's smoking it? That want to say anything?
On TV, you saw like
On the TV. Any other questions? Anything else?
What about other issues that really impact us as a community? We mentioned the marijuana, but what are some of the other issues? We talked about voter apathy. What about some of the other issues that impact and affect Brocktonians?
Since we're talking about drugs, why not the opiates?
Mm-hmm.
You want to come up?
That's all I want.
Courtney?
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
I'm not from Brockton. I'm actually not even from the state. I'm from Ohio, but I just moved here a year and a half ago. So when I was doing the research on the opioid crisis, I saw that over 1,900 people have died from overdose. And I was looking at some of the candidates that are running for governor. Governor Baker's going up against 3 other people, 2 Republicans. It's just 2, okay. And I know that they are working on like the drug reform and coming down on criminal justice. What would be something that Brockton is looking for? Like, what would help Brockton with the opioid crisis? Because I saw that 42 people have died from overdose just in Brockton in the year 2016. So does the city find that as a big issue? Is that one of the top 5 issues that you guys want to address? Because in our next forum, I would like to highlight on the issues that you guys most want to hear about.
Comments?
Yeah, I think that's an issue that I would like to know more information about, because I know I'm a recent graduate from Bridgewater State, and that was actually a big problem. We've actually lost a couple of students due to that, and we are the first state school to have Narcan available, and I would like to have more information on that, just because I would want to know a solution. Like, is Narcan just having that on hand, is that the only way to like end this crisis?
Good.
Can I just ask a question? How does the mayor of Brockton come down on the opioid issue? I mean, I don't know. I never hear.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't live in Brockton, but my daughter does, and I spend a lot of time in Brockton. I live the next town over. But I never hear anything from him.
Well, I don't want to speak for the mayor.
Yes, I
No,
don't
but
see
what you
that
heard.
I don't want to speak for the mayor, but I can tell you that I know that from the Champion program that we were one of the first in the city, one of the first in the Commonwealth that have Narcan available by private citizens actually being trained in its use. I think we were one of the first, but it's through the Champion program. But I don't want to speak for Mayor Carpenter. But I do want to ask Brother Willie a quick question. Because she brought the opiate, what do you call it, addiction up. And I'm pausing because I'm trying to figure out how to parse my words. So in the 80s, I was crisscrossing the Commonwealth when we had the crack cocaine epidemic. So now this may make people feel uncomfortable. But when black folks were dying of crack, we couldn't get much support. We got locked up. Yeah, right. We got locked up. We got a lot of police. Clinton gave us a lot of police later in the 90s. But we were getting locked up. So I'm very, very sensitive to the opiate epidemic. But we need to also have a conversation is that when black folks are dying of stuff, folks ain't saying too much. They didn't say too much about crack cocaine. I remember the biggest thing, thank you. I remember the biggest thing that we talked about, and y'all know, black folks did, when we knew it was really, really bad, when people were stealing from their parents. Remember that? We all talked about, we knew that this was really an epidemic. And when people were sleeping in hallways. But now that we have all this money that's coming in for the opiate addiction, it's just bothersome to me that things haven't been looked at holistically. Am I making sense?
Yes. Yeah.
So, well, can you help us address the disconnect?
Well, I think what happens is if you take a look at the history of drug addiction and crime, and you'll see even with the crime families, initially it was to make money and get those into the inner cities. So there was that history, and it wasn't until it just was so successful in their minds that it spilled into the suburbs and the rural areas. So there is a racial element to it, But and you're right, So it's I come back to all lives matter, and so but you're right. There was a double standard. And there still is, right?
On the opioid, because it hits every demographic. I work in healthcare, so, and I do a little bit of health insurance, and I'm on the phones. So you hear, it's everybody, everyone, and I mean everyone, from 17 to 76 and beyond, that are doing the opiates. And how people get hooked. How they get hooked? Pain medication, pain management. And the simplest thing, next thing you know, they're dependent upon this. You know, I also work in Boston. I work at Boston Medical Center. So along where I go to come into work on Mass Ave, they used to call it the Methadone Mile.
Mm.
It is a mile, actually a mile, where you see, you know, it's like The Walking Dead. My apology for that, but it is like The Walking Dead. You know, they go into their drug seizures and they're standing and they won't fall down. It is highly disgusting, like Tony said, in the 80s, when I was working at McDonald's. Most of my workers, you know, I heard the conversation. I've never really seen anything, but a lot of people just wouldn't show up. You know, they would get a job, work for a couple of weeks, and just be gone. You know, I worked in the Roxbury McDonald's, so you know, it was very sad to see a lot of my workers get addicted to crack. You know, there was a lot of theft, and it was hard to manage. So now that the opioid is hitting a lot of demographics, not only black, white, anyone can get addicted so quickly. Now it's okay, now we need to draw a life preserver. You know, where was this when we needed a life preserver? So not to lessen that it's being attacked now, but at all times, we should always be paying attention to all things. And that's just my own way of just saying, you know, where were they then?
Mhm.
We started something with this opioid topic, but I just wanted to, just going off of this. And I guess I'm not, so it's a midterm issue. So I'm just curious if anybody knows what is going to be on the ballot regarding this issue. There's two things that stand out here for me. One is that Baker signed a law that limits new prescriptions to 7 days to allow time to investigate and to prevent doctors from unnecessarily prescribing opioids. 7 days is enough time to get you addicted. 7 days might even be too long. Just to piggyback on what you said, it doesn't take long to become addicted. So 7 days might still be too long. I mean, it's a measure, but it still may not be enough. The other thing is he's proposing new legislation to strengthen penalties on drug dealers whose actions lead to fatalities. Well, some of these drug dealers are the doctors.
Right.
Not, you know, they're not doing it to be facetious. It's their job. And some of the drug dealers that are causing these fatalities are the doctors. So what is the issue that we're going to be voting on in midterm with regard to opioids is my question.
Mhm. Good.
Really good.
Excellent. Yeah.
So to answer your question, Governor Baker, like I wrote, has already passed legislature on the 7 days up to review the prescription, make sure that we're not unnecessarily prescribing patients with opioids. What you would be voting on is for him, if you vote for Governor Baker, he's basically saying that he's going to continue putting resources into prevention and educating. So, and I know some of his other candidates that he's running up against have also wanted to put resources in there. So you would be basically voting for the candidate and not necessarily the issue. So that's, I just put down where he stands on that crisis.
I just had one comment about the prevention. Because I worked a short time at Brockton Hospital, not in the medical field, but I did work at the hospital. And they have, it's called the psych ward. But some people come in there who are addicted and they're fighting, but if there's no room, my question, I guess I do have a question is, do we think that with regard to prevention, that monies will be spread among the different areas in Massachusetts? So if we here in Brockton will have some more facilities. Because I actually watched a young man begging, it's gonna make me cry, begging for help. And we had no room for him in the hospital. And all we could do was give him a piece of paper with a list of places and said, call every number on here till somebody says they can take you. The first person to say yes was on Cape Cod, and he had no way to get there. And we had no way to get him there.
Yeah.
So he was still stuck in the street with no help, begging.
Yeah, now see, this is the issue, and the money, and you're absolutely right, the way the at the national level, the way the legislation was written is so that localities could decide where the money would go. And that is an issue in terms of, and that's where the money is housing, and we have a psych ward, also a Good Samaritan. You know, it's not just Brockton Hospital. So, and to help these men and women, and it's tragic to see the age. Like you said earlier, it's just there are young people, but there are older people too, in their 50s and 60s. And what happens is families, some families are not really. How should I say? That's the issue. Some families just, they want you out. They're not being caring, and so a last resort. Some of these people and it's not enough money for a placement. And you're right, it's the beds and the placement. And so the way the legislation was, it's, it goes to the locality and then they decide, but you need more rooms. But it is a major issue. And these are just 5, and there are others. The other thing too, I do want to call your attention to, there's a site we have now in Brockton. We, for the last 2 years, the mayor's been involved with leadership training, and Lynn Smith has been involved, and we've had these various workshops and forums, and now they have a website out, and it's I believe it's C-Click, it's en.cclickfix.com/watch. But what happens is the city is, it's a wonderful, it's divided into wards, and where people can actually go online and talk to their neighbors and mention issues, and so it's in its infant stage, but I know like all things that Lynn does, it's gonna be good. But there's hope. I don't want us to leave here today thinking that the midterms are, they're doldrums and we're worse off, but we're not. But it does call us to be involved and to participate. There was another quote, Dietrich Bonhoeffer: "Action springs not from thought, but from a readiness for responsibility." And that's where we are. We're responsible. So once somebody knows something, one has to share it and get involved, and just maintain the energy to do that. Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a question, but what I would like though is going back to when we look at the flyer and our original question. I want a takeaway. So I want anyone who sees this on TV and on local TV, I think it's going to be publicized, to have the one takeaway is, why should I vote at this midterm election? If we could answer that, I know it's a lot to answer in 2 minutes, but can we give an answer in 2 minutes? Why is the midterm election important, and why should people who perhaps have never voted and maybe be voting for the first time, why should they vote?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, you should vote because regardless of whether you're a citizen or a resident, you want to make the community in which you live a better place. And so it just doesn't happen, and it starts with individual involvement. So that's the first thing. Secondly, a community is just that. It's a membership of several inhabitants in a certain space, and you should really be concerned about those that live in your community, especially those who are not as well off as you or have special needs that the government really has to see to, so they can have some kind of decent quality of life. But I think there are other reasons that some of you may have, and I'd like to use this opportunity for you to come to the mic. Come to the mic.
And this will be our last question. We're going to start wrapping it up.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I like that. Yeah, it's always good to have a takeaway. Well, you may not be the last. After you speak, somebody else might come. But it's a takeaway. We're talking about takeaways. Yep.
So as a takeaway for me personally, like as like someone who's like in their 20s, I would say that you should vote because you're not exempt from the decisions being made from like higher up levels. What I've learned is that, especially from this past president election, that like what I thought wouldn't affect me has affected me, and if not me, then like the immediate people around me. So I think, especially for like a young person's point of view, is that like there's just so much, I guess, like detachment from like what goes on in office. You know, it's something that's just on social media and just being posted and reposted, but like there's actually an effect, like a personal effect that like government has, whether it's local or again national. So yeah, again, like the decisions that people are making are going to affect you like whichever way, but that's why I think it's important to get involved, because again, you're not exempt from it. Like when it comes down to the point, like when it comes down to the wire, it will affect you.
I'll give the old person.
Okay, good. No, there's room for both of you.
And so I'm trying to even think if I ever voted in a midterm election. And so just from the forum and hearing Mr. Wilson, he started out by saying that all of the House, half of the Senate will be changed based on this midterm election. And I think in terms of President Obama, the millennials brought him in on a wave. And then the midterm elections, both of them changed his ability to govern, because his majority in the House and the Senate in the next midterm election, it went Republican. And we know how the Republicans restricted him from doing anything during his term. So even if you think even federal on a national level, but also on the local level, thinking about opiates, think about criminal justice, and we didn't talk about criminal justice today, you know, that during that crack cocaine, when people were all put in jail for nonviolent offenses, and they sit in jail today, right? Whereas with the opiate crisis, you don't go to jail, you get drug treatment. And so it's a difference. And so I think from the national level to the local level, things can change in the midterm, and I'm definitely going to make sure I vote this time.
Thank you.
We will continue this, and I'm excited that people want to continue, but we do have to wrap up in terms of recording. These conversations are great. We have these conversations everywhere, all over the city, in hair salons and barbershops and local pubs here, and opinions count, but the opinions really count when you are in the election booth voting. So that's when your opinion really counts. So our opinion counts. We want Brockton to count. Please vote.
Thank you.
For your time.